Well, hello there. Welcome to the Soil and Roots podcast, where we journey together into deep discipleship. I'm Brian Fisher, and this is episode 133, The Love That Surpasses Knowledge. And this is the last episode of Season 6. I meant to get this out to you last week. Unfortunately, I had some technical difficulties here at the studios. I needed to replace some equipment, but we're back now with you, and thanks for being patient with us. I know we call our studio Fish Tank Studios, but it's probably more aptly titled Redneck Studios because sometimes things are actually held together with actual duct tape. We're going to wrap up this season with a sweeping overview of all that we've covered so far to get us set up for the next season, which should be amazing. If you're one of these crazy people who have listened to or watched every episode so far, a huge thank you from the team here. You are obviously pretty serious about deep discipleship and exploring some parts of life and Jesus and ourselves, which don't get a lot of press, so kudos to you. But if you've jumped in somewhere in the middle of these 6 seasons, or you just pick up an episode every now and then because it interests you, that's great too. Thanks for being with us, and we're glad that you're joining us even today. As I move through some of the high points of the last 3 years of discussions, I'm also going to add some new color because, frankly, the team here has a deeper understanding of what we're wrestling with than when we did 3 years ago, which is probably part of the point. We always recommend that anyone new to the Soil and Roots community start all the way back at episode 1 because the episodes and the seasons build on each other. However, if you are new but don't want to go back and check out 132 other episodes, this might just be the best episode with which to start. So let's dig in. Let's take a brief trip down memory lane and get our heads and hearts ready as we get ready for the next stage of our spiritual journey. The Soil and Roots adventure started all the way back actually in 2021 when I began to wrestle with my lifelong walk with Jesus, the role and purpose of the modern church, and Christianity and discipleship in general. 2020 was a very difficult year for most people, and it certainly was for us, though not just because of the pandemic. Jessica and I lost our jobs, our careers, most of our friends, and virtually all of our community. It was devastating in many ways, and I know many of you have been through similar circumstances. Perhaps it was a divorce, or an illness, a death of someone close to you, a betrayal, a job loss. Most of us at some point will hit what we call the wall, a time of suffering and trial that may cause us to question if our hearts and heads are actually on the same page. Are God's promises really true? Not as a theological, intellectual question, but as an experienced reality. And if they are true, why don't I seem to experience this abundant life, this perfect peace, this love that surpasses knowledge? Well, some of us ignore the wall, others deconstruct their faith or their lives because of it, and some press through it with the hope that more peace and joy and love will meet them on the other side. During my wall, I came across the writings of a theologian and philosopher named Dallas Willard. I'd never heard of him before. Though he died in 2013, Willard's writings and teachings have become well known in various places around the world. I suspect he's had more influence in death than he had in life, which is generally the mark of somebody's pretty special, somebody unique. It was in one of his books that I first came across the term the Great Omission, and it's a term I've said here about 1,000 times. Willard's premise was that modern Christianity, including its thousands of churches and institutions, struggles to produce genuine disciples, despite the clear intention of the Great Commission. In fact, he said it was a fairly new phenomenon in world history that someone could be a Christian, but not a disciple. His point was that few people have centered their lives around the inner transformation of becoming more like Jesus. He had yet to find a church or an organization that partnered with people so that over time they might become less angry, more forgiving, generous, relationally shrewd, self-aware, relationally secure. Where were the churches to help us become more intimate so wrapped up in Jesus that self-giving love just pours out of us, that we really try to practice unity, that culture is being transformed around us just because we exude the person of Jesus so powerfully. Years after Willard wrote the book, The Great Omission, we seem to find ourselves in the exact same spot. Is modern Christianity interested in making converts? Many times. In educating people? All the time, without question. In engaging us in service? For sure. In growing institutions? Absolutely. But in helping us experience an inner transformation so that our lives become more like His? Well, probably not so much. Sometimes we're criticized here because we talk so much about the Great Omission and the problems that result. We should be more positive. We should spin the situation in a different way. Well, we can't come together to solve a challenge if we don't articulate what that challenge is. And the consequences of the Great Omission are extraordinarily severe. Not only do people following Jesus often struggle with anxiety, fear, insecurities, fractured relationships, loneliness, celebrity worship, people-pleasing, perfectionism, dependency on our performance, and disconnection, the culture is suffering a lot. Just watch the news. We've uncovered several reasons why the Great Omission exists, and we won't review them all today. One that is worth reviewing is that we live in an age that disproportionately values and prizes the intellect. Though René Descartes was apparently an earnest and smart man, his conclusion that I think, therefore I am, has settled into the foundations of Western philosophy and thought, inside and outside the church. We find this wrong philosophical assumption everywhere, including, as I just said, the church. We deeply prize information. In fact, it's often one of the most valuable currencies of our time, often more powerful than money. Modern Christianity is often based on the unconscious assumption that the point of the Christian life is to become educated. Biblical literacy is at the forefront of most of our related institutions and programs. It's somewhat ironic that we live in a time of unprecedented access to the Bible and Bible teaching and sermons and lectures and related information. We have access to limitless biblical material on our phones that we can access within seconds. Yet, we have become one of the most biblically illiterate generations in church history. The American Bible Society's State of the Bible 2025 report found that only about 41% of Americans open a Bible on their own even a few times a year, down from nearly half just a few years ago. Pew Research discovered that most U.S. adults could only answer a handful of very basic questions about Scripture correctly. And Barna's Gen Z study concluded that only 4% of young people today hold what they define as a biblical worldview. In other words, fewer and fewer people, even within the church, can explain the basic storyline of Scripture or connect their beliefs and habits to a biblical framework. Yet, we are not brains on sticks. Biblical literacy is important, but plenty of corrupt people know their Scriptures well, be it some Pharisees in Jesus' time or the ongoing stream of fallen celebrity pastors today. Here is where author Judith Haugen jumps in and reminds us of the wonderfully complex nature of what it means to be human. She claims that true belief, truths that form us from the inside out, must be believed by both the head and the heart. It's one thing to intellectually agree to a statement of faith. It's another for our hearts to experience that statement of faith. Well, and there's the kicker. Our heads learn through collecting and assessing information. Our hearts don't learn that way. Our hearts, quote unquote, learn through relationships and experience. Well, what sort of things sit at the bottom of our hearts that so often contradict what's sitting in our heads? We probably aren't aware of all that sits down there, but we do know two things: desires and ideas. Which brings us to the very heartbeat of Soil and Roots, and that is the realm of ideas. That's what the name Soil and Roots means. Our hearts are our roots, and our roots are planted in the soil of ideas. We've defined an idea here as an assumption, a conclusion, or a principle in which our hearts are rooted, though we generally aren't aware of it. Considering Dallas Willard, as well as numerous theologians and philosophers, maintain that these ideas are one of the most powerful forces in the universe, it's surprising that we hear almost nothing about them in modern Christianity. In fact, it's shocking. If we are powered and governed more by ideas than anything else, shouldn't we be spending some time exploring them? In fact, one way to describe deep discipleship is the inner transformation of our ideas from dark to light, but not simply through education. Our ideas are formed and reformed primarily through relationships and experiences. So what if our ideas, these unconscious experienced realities in our hearts, don't align with our intellectual beliefs? Because it's very possible to hold to mental beliefs about God and others and ourselves and creation, and yet also be possible that our hearts hold to very different ideas. And most of us, to some degree or another, live in this tension. Our heads believe one thing while our hearts hold on to another. In fact, our ideas about God are more important than our stated beliefs. Well, how in the world can that be true? In his book, Surrender to Love, David Benner writes this, quote, "Take a moment and try a simple exercise. The results will tell you a great deal about the nature of your spiritual journey. Imagine God thinking about you. What do you assume God feels when you come to mind? When I ask people to do this, a surprising number of people say that the first thing they assume God feels is disappointment. Others assume that God feels anger. In both cases, these people are convinced that it is their sin that first catches God's attention. I think they are wrong, and I think the consequences of such a view of God are enormous." End quote. Benner is inviting us to ask a curious question that probes beneath our beliefs to our ideas, the experienced realities in which we actually live. Many people who follow Jesus will tell you they believe that God loves them unconditionally. Those same people, when presented with Benner's question, will often respond in the exact opposite way. Richard Foster once commented that the world doesn't need more intelligent or even gifted people. What the world needs most is deep people. Well, what does that mean? What is a deep person, and why do we need them so much? Well, a deep person is simply someone who is intentionally becoming more attuned or more awake to God's ideas and others' ideas and their own ideas and those found in culture, meaning they're learning how to listen very carefully to hearts and not just to words. To put it another way, they are becoming more like Jesus. Here at Soil and Roots, we call them deep disciples, and that, of course, is our mission, to help cultivate people who are becoming increasingly attuned to God and others and themselves, to become people of depth. The deeper the person, the more we become like Jesus from the inside out. We become more securely attached to God. We begin to view the world and people and culture very differently from most other people. We find ourselves forgiving more easily, loving more freely, giving more radically, trusting more implicitly. Our anxiety and fears actually do lessen, and our capacity for joy increases, as does our self-giving love. Depth, not necessarily breadth. Modern Christianity is generally fascinated with breadth, number of church attendees, books sold, conversions, baptisms, and so on. The Western Church is obsessed with breadth, but they call it multiplication. No one seems to ask what we're multiplying, though it's normally converts. That doesn't seem to have worked out quite so well. Depth, however, can't be programmed or systematized. It's relational, it's messy, it's long-term, it's difficult. It has ups and downs and joys and sorrows. So a deep person is intentionally becoming more attuned to the heart of God, others, and themselves, primarily by taking the time to explore these ideas, even when they're in tension with our stated beliefs. Now, I've admitted to you that it takes some time and a lot of practice to uncover these ideas. You may recall I compared it to the fuzzy posters and images called stereograms that were so popular during the 90s. To see the 3D image hidden in what appears to be a random picture, you have to practice training your eyes to relax and look into the picture. Well, finding ideas about ourselves or others or God generally works the same way. There's an irony here, though, in that the path to depth doesn't start with doing or busyness or accomplishment or performance. It actually begins with receiving. Again, let's go back to David Benner. He writes this, quote, "We miss the point when we simply try to do what he tells us to do. And we miss the point when we simply try to follow the pattern of his life. Genuinely encountering love is not the same thing as inviting Jesus into your heart, joining or attending a church, or doing what Jesus commands. It is the experience of love that is transformational. You simply cannot bask in divine love and not be affected." End quote. This journey into depth, into genuine discipleship, starts with basking in divine love. And obviously, basking in divine love cannot simply be an intellectual conclusion. It must be experienced in the heart, which means receiving this type of love transforms the ideas that are settled down there, most notably our ideas about God and ourselves. This path to depth also, though, involves resolving three challenges that we've discussed here that are somewhat pertinent only to our age: story, community, and purpose. Story, community, purpose. We've called them the three primary problems: the discipleship dilemma, the formation gap, and the forgotten kingdom. Story, community, purpose. To become a deep disciple means that at times we must take an inward journey. We explore our hearts, our ideas, our true desires, and our stories. This may well be the most powerful cause of the Great Omission. There is very little permission or guidance given to help us take this inward journey. Many followers of Jesus are not self-aware, and it frankly kills the Great Commission. The theological concept is called double knowledge. Our capacity to know God and his ideas is intimately intertwined with our willingness to know ourselves and our ideas. We can't have one without the other. The term double knowledge is often associated with John Calvin, though he tended to emphasize the exploration of our sin and dependency on God, which sounds very much like Calvin. But self-knowledge goes beyond that, and many thinkers throughout church history have contributed to this concept of double knowledge. Augustine, Ignatius, Kierkegaard, Aquinas, and more recently, writers such as Kurt Thompson or Henry Nouwen. True self-knowledge is the Spirit's revelation of who we are before God, created in his image, yes, distorted by sin, yet invited into restoration, into a calling, into communion with divine love. It involves getting to know all aspects of our human person, including these deeply settled elements we've explored, such as our ideas and our genuine desires. That's why exploring our stories is so essential to discipleship. So much of who we are is formed in the first few years of life. If we don't take the time and effort to understand why and how our hearts were formed the way they are, we exclude a vital component of self-knowledge, and that impacts our capacity to know God. The second challenge we come together to solve is the formation gap. Put simply, few of us are part of any sort of gatherings and communities that exist to actually help us become more like Jesus from the inside out. And yes, that includes most of us who attend a church. If you look at any type of ecosystem that humans construct to help one person become more like another, you're going to find 5 common characteristics in all of them: time, habit, community, intimacy, and instruction. Professional sports teams, college, cults, marriage, early childhood, recovery programs, the early church, the military, they all embed these 5 elements into their cultures. The modern church, however, rarely features all 5, and thus our discipleship is often stunted as a result. The solution is fairly self-evident: recapture intentionally formative communities. Now, that's easier said than done, as we've discussed at length, but I have argued that genuine Christian communities today should look very, very radically different compared to most modern gatherings in our age. Okay, story, community, and purpose. What's our purpose? Why are we here? There are many good answers to that question, but the one that we've explored has to do with the primary reason Jesus said he came, which was to incept his kingdom. That is the good news he proclaimed. Yet, it's good news we rarely hear about in modern Christianity. We hear the good news about the fact that our sins are forgiven, and thank God they are. But if you line up 10 people who follow Jesus and ask them what the kingdom is, you're likely to get 8 to 10 different answers. That's very surprising, considering the word gospel is usually paired with of the kingdom in the Bible, the good news of the kingdom. We've adopted a theologian's definition that the kingdom is God's reign through God's people over God's place. And the purpose of his reign is to make everything new. So our purpose is to join with our king as he renews and redeems and reconciles everything. Education, government, business, church, family, the arts, and even, yes, the media. To become people of depth, people attuned to God and ourselves, people who join with Jesus to transform these powerful hidden ideas that govern individuals and cultures, we press into our stories, we reform intentionally vibrant, formative communities, and we ingest and promote the purpose of our King to make everything new. Still, if the purpose of deep discipleship is to become more like Jesus, it gets to the question, well, what is Jesus actually like? He is everything mentioned in 1 Corinthians 13, and he is the ultimate example of the fruits of the Spirit found in Galatians. Plus, we catch a glimpse of what it means to become more like him, and thus the best version of ourselves, by simply observing him, by imagining ourselves in the gospel stories, and by watching how he relates to God and others, himself, and creation. I mean, Jesus is the most relationally secure person in human history. He is utterly sure and safe in who he is. He is securely attached to his Father. He rests utterly and completely in his role as the beloved. He isn't hurried. He isn't stressed. He isn't worried. He's relaxed. He's in control. He is the wisest and most relationally shrewd person to walk the planet. So when we consider becoming more like him, can we envision ourselves in a similar way? Can we envision a life of singular purpose, of healthy relational boundaries, of little anxiety or fear? Can we envision a life where we feel safe because our trust in a good God is so deep it would be silly to feel otherwise? Can we envision a life where, of course, we're tempted, but the idea of engaging in harmful behavior is just unappealing? A life where prayer is so rich, so overflowing with the presence of the Father that we just don't want to leave? I admit it's kind of tough to envision this type of life, at least it is for me. I'm not yet there. Yet isn't this what Jesus talks about when he mentions the abundant life, or what Paul refers to when he prays that we comprehend the love of God which surpasses knowledge, and that we are filled to all the fullness of God? Well, how is the Great Omission solved? I would argue it's solved by becoming people of depth. I don't think it's through some marketing campaign or what we call revival today, some crusade or political event. It's just a process of intentionally becoming more attuned to God and others, ourselves, and God's good planet, of accepting God's kindness to experience him more and more intimately. Generally speaking, our invitation to this type of depth comes through the form of some suffering. Yes, the wall. And pressing into the wall is tough, but it's made easier if we do join hands with a trusted friend or two and face our sufferings in community rather than by ourselves. It is a lifelong journey. Depth does not arrive overnight. In fact, sometimes it seems to take forever. But it does come, and we begin to live the type of life we otherwise thought unlikely, if not impossible. Thanks for being with me today as we've sauntered down memory lane. I hope this episode was helpful to perhaps congeal some of the things that we've explored over the past few years. I don't want to say too much about Season 7, though if you've enjoyed our journey so far, I think you'll benefit from sticking around. And thanks again for sticking around. It's been a joy to explore Deep Disciple with you this far, and I can't wait to see where this adventure takes us going forward. For more information on Soil and Roots, you know where you can go. You can go to our website at soilandroots.org, and as always, you can just email us. We do respond at fish@soilandroots.org. That's fish@soilandroots.org. If you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Soil and Roots Podcast, and on YouTube and Substack at just Soil and Roots. Today's episode was produced by Zach Fisher, who also provides our music. You can find him on Spotify at FishU. Thanks again for being with us, and we'll see you next time for Season 7.